to start. It needed to be accessible to my kids, and me too, actually. I needed to be able to walk to work every day. It was clear to me when Kathy and I started talking about a children's consignment shop, as soon as we met in 1979 and early 1980, it took us about a couple of years to get it going. I guess we moved here in 78. We moved into our house in 79. It was clear we each used children's consignment stores, me in New York and Kathy in Chicago, and we couldn't fathom the fact that there was not one in this family-centered, amazing community. And so we talked about it. We interviewed some people who ran consignment shops, and we brought my friend Margaret in, who'd returned to town. And we found our space in an extraordinary way. We had signed a lease with Donatelli, Klein, and Smith. We didn't understand in those days that just because we signed the lease didn't mean the lease was in effect. They hadn't signed the lease. So about 10 days before we were to open, and I had a house full of consignment things that we had collected, Mr. Klein explained to me that there was no space for us to move into. And we went to a dinner party, and I explained this, and my friend at the table said, I have an optician space. This guy wants to get out of his lease, you can have a shop. And about 10 days later, we opened. My husband got the racks, we wallpapered, we had an amazing start, and it's been going on for 37 and a half years, so it was remarkable. And to me, the key about women on the plaza is something I said to Rebecca when you're Jabby. People, especially women in the Lake Ann area, but all over Reston, there's something about us rolling up our sleeves and saying we can do this, whatever it is, whether it's on the PTA or whether it's a political issue or a cultural issue or a child-rearing issue. There's a sense of women coming together and making things happen. So we just foolishly, naively knew we could do this, and we did it.
My name is Susan Burwell, and Bud and I owned Reston Shoes Bookshop. When people come in, they say, so how long have you been here? And I said, well, the shop's been here 40 years. But Bud and I are the new owners. We've only had it for 20 years. So I'm really representing the beginnings of the shop and the Sues. Sue Wenzel and Sue Schramm moved here in 1966. We're fast friends as they met and became best friends as volunteers for Head Start. And then a few years later, Sue Wenzel moved with her family to Denver, Colorado. They stayed in touch, and they moved back. And Sue Wenzel said, oh, there's so many wonderful bookstores in Denver, Colorado. Why don't we have a bookstore in Reston? We need a bookstore in Reston. So they got together and went to all the estate sales and the yard sales and filled up their garages and opened up January 7th, 1978. And much to their delight and dismay, they sold their entire stock the first weekend. So they were only open a few days a week because during the week they had to buy more books. So after a few years, my husband Bud is retired, but he was a teacher, special ed teacher, and at the time he was teaching at Woodson High School, he was teaching English and one other subjects. So for those of you that have been teachers or know teachers, you end up shelling a lot of your own money for supplies and books, etc. So he had an entire bookcase of English books that he wanted his students to be able to read and to be able to take home and not worry about bringing them back. So he spent many a day, an evening, a summer, and actually started working for the Sues part-time. After a few, that was also at the same time, Victoria Reed who was also with us for a long time. We lost her to cancer a few years ago. She was also an employee. So the Sues were reaching the point where they were best friends. And it's hard, I'll tell you, to have a business open 7 days a week. And they wanted to travel together. So they approached us, and it took us a few years to scrabble it up, but we ended up buying the business in 1999. That was our 20 years ago. And at that time, next door was the dry cleaners, and that was empty. So we convinced our landlord to also buy that property and cut a hole in the wall. And so we have a sitting area, because the original shop was just chock-a-block with books to the ceiling and no place to sit, really. So now we can have book clubs. We've had a literature class that's running on 12 years. It's sponsored by George Mason. We have a monthly reading series for local authors. We have music at least 3 or 4 times a year. We have Bud finds all the Saturday market music people to play in front of the shop on Saturday. But we also have a connection to the community like all these other women have. One of the fun things that happens is, as you walk in the door, we have what somebody gave us was a library card index bookcase. And that's where we keep, we offer store credit or cash. And I've had so many wonderful moments with people that live in Reston. They're all well-read. That's where we get our books. They bring them to us. But we have so many people that go overseas. They work for the State Department. And then when they come back to the States, they come back to Reston. And they come in and go, well, you wouldn't have a card for me, would you? I said, well, how long ago were you here? We go, oh, 15, 20 years. And sure enough, we still have their card. And they're very happy to continue shopping. Another story was it happens quite often during the holidays when people come back and now they're children and they're coming back to see their parents and their grandparents and their aunts and their uncles to celebrate the holidays, and then they just have to make a stop. And they have remembrances of growing up as a child in that bookstore. And just last year, we had some 20-somethings come and say, oh, my grandma used to bring me here when I was little. And I said, well, did she bring us books? She goes, oh, I don't know. She passed away last year, but, we had to come back. And so I looked in the card catalog, and there was a card that still had store credit for them. We all 3 store credit. But we've had multiple generations. I think that's another thing that about, I'm a kid that grew up in Fairfax City. And my first real job was in Reston in 1970, but I didn't come back. I came back as a renter in Reston in 1980. And I had been around the metropolitan area as a renter, but nothing felt like it all felt like subdivisions. And I really knew my mother and her best friend in the 60s, it was a big deal there for all you real estate people you might recall. It was a new thing to have new homes furnished as model houses. Now, my mom and her best friend on Saturdays used to go to model houses. They weren't going to buy a house, but they wanted to look at the decorations. And one time I joined them, and we came to Waterview Cluster. And I fell in love with it then in the 60s. I said, I'm coming back. And my mother and her friend said, oh, honey, townhouses in the country. I can understand in Georgetown, but in the country. Well, look at us now. So it took me a while. I bought my first Waterview Cluster house in 1980. But now we have our second Waterview Cluster. Waterview Cluster, we move up and down the street. You do that in Colson, right? And so we bought the shop in 1999, and like I say, we're the new owners. Maybe in 1 year, when we surpass the Sue's ownership, I won't say that anymore, but it's a very pleasant way to, we say it's a very pleasant way to make very little money. But you don't do it. You don't do it for the money. You do it because it's our second home, and people, when they can't find us, they know they can find us at the bookshop. So we have our friends and family come visit and just sit and chat for a while we're working. So it's a lot of fun.
Okay, so I thought it would be interesting to hear from you all. How do you think operating a business today differs from when you started operating a business at Lake Ann?
I have a great answer.
Okay, start with you.
Thought you'd never asked.
I don't know, yeah. My shop has not evolved at all. The business plan hasn't really changed. I still have two enormous 8 by 10 Rolodexes on my counter. I don't have a computer. Everything is by pen and paper. So yeah, some things, people evolve, stores modernize, not small change. We haven't changed much. But I was going to add on to what Susie said. It's a sentimental journey through the shops that Lake Ann, because for many of us, the galleries, the shops, because there's so many of us, for one thing, have aged in place very gracefully. Many children, our children, not mine, but many, have moved back to raise their children in this extraordinary community that Bob built. And he built this amazing, he had such a vision and he implemented it. And it's like utopia here at Lake Ann. It's this warm and loving and friendly place. And so lots and lots of people come into my shop and they will bring their children or their grandchildren. And often the mom will say, I used to come in here with grandma when I was your age. And it's just a remarkable feeling. And just like Susie, we have paper proof of that. And I will check the defunct consignment accounts. People have money on their account, and people will shop against it. They can come back. They've come back from being posted overseas or moving to another state and then coming back for a visit and discover they have cash to spend. But mostly they have memories to share. It's a very gratifying way to spend your life when you have a shop like it.
Linda, do you have anything to add?
What was the question? Let's see, back in 1969, well, of course, it's much more technology driven.
Some places.
Yeah, I know, that's why I looked at you.
Yeah.
But I can tell you with the floral industry and the internet, it changed everything. So from my point of view, yes, much more technology driven. Also, it takes a lot, not maybe at Lake Ann, but for many women, I think it takes a lot more capitalization to start a business.
Yeah, good point.
Just to second what they're saying, we don't have a computer either, and I have to chuckle when people call and they ask us to look up a book. And you're not computerized? No, but I bet I can find it. People are delighted when they come in and say, "Oh, that's your cash register."
Yeah.
And it's an old, 18. So tell me what year?
88.
1888 brass cash register from the old days.
Like Larry's.
Like Larry's. Yeah. Oh, that's where you keep your money. But what we did evolve when we bought the shop in 99 weeks. We now accept credit cards, but we did in 1999. So that was our evolution.
We still don't take that. I was going to say that, yes, in theory, there's a lot that's changed about a business plan for a children's shop in these days. When we opened, it was all our kind of creative energy and our enthusiasm and everybody's excitement because there were no other options to find really good kids things at really low prices. There was no digital buying, there was no buying online, there was no buying nothing Reston. It was 1981, and nobody was even recycling newspapers in those days. So we were bringing this whole concept of recycling to the Plaza. But now also, because of the way buying and selling has changed, it has impacted shops like mine. and probably like Susie's doing to some extent, because so much can be done online. You don't have to go to a brick and mortar space. You can just do this on your lunch hour and get it delivered. But it's the relationship building in our shops and restaurants and galleries and the museum that's so powerful. Like, this realization for people that we recognize you, we remember you, we know your children, your grandchildren, and it's really special. It's been extraordinary, really.
My business is quite different from theirs in that I don't have a brick and mortar presence. I work out of my home. I'm based online primarily. Despite all that, I'm really concerned by some of the changes that they've described, where the world is going more technological, more online sales, less brick and mortar, because businesses like mine can't thrive without brick and mortar businesses where we can gather. I get most of my business from people that I know. And I know those people because I hang out with them in coffee shops and networking events at bars and restaurants. And if these businesses don't thrive, neither do the home-based businesses. So that's certainly something to address in this change in the economy. I don't know what I would do without these ladies.
Thank you.
So they've already stated that Lake Ann is largely dominated by women-owned businesses, but it's actually 75%, which is amazing. I don't think this has always been the case. I would like to hear why you all think it is the case today. Anybody want to start?
I've put some thought into it, and I've already said that I don't know the answer to this, but I have pondered it for the last few months. And I think there's a certain